Hi, I'm Dr. Renee Threlfall. I'm a research scientist at the Department of Food Science at the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. And I'm going to talk to you today about taking the next step to food entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about facilities for food production, equipment for food production, food packaging, food labeling, and food production successes. So first, let's talk about facilities for food production. Permanent facilities. These are facilities that have been inspected and approved by the Arkansas Department of Health. New or remodeled facilities will require a plan review from the Arkansas Department of Health. So if you are making a commercial product, you will look for a facility to manufacture the product. So what do you look for? So you want to look for someone that is providing a certified and inspected facility for production. You also want a facility, if you're going to be renting or being a client in a facility, you want a facility that's going to offer support for the development and finalization of your product. And that it means helping convert that recipe to commercial production quantities and also providing you information on ingredients and packaging and label. And in general, assisting you with food processing regulations and documents. Because commercial food products are sold to consumers, there can be a lot of food safety issues, and so there are a lot of regulations and documents that must be collected and maintained when you are producing food products. Regulation assistance includes help with the FDA registration form. So if you are a food manufacturing business and you've started your own little company, you're going to have to register your company with the FDA. You're going to have to get an Arkansas Department of Health license to operate a food processing operation. You're going to have to complete recall and allergen control plans. So allergens would be if you have flour in your product or any kind of nut would involve control plans on if you needed to recall your product. You sometimes need to have process authority for required certification on certain products that have been acidified or if they don't have a lot of acid in them, which means sometimes they could be a little not as food safe. So they have to have an authority that's saying that you've gone through a lot of manufacturing steps to ensure that that product is safe and that food process authority is authorizing the production. You have to be familiar with the Food Safety Modernization Act, FSMA safety plans, and also product liability insurance. And clients in certain facilities have to have liability insurance. This is an insurance that is specific to food products that insures your company if for some reason you create a food that causes a food safety issue, then you have insurance against that. So what are licensed and inspected kitchens? What are some of your options if you're going to be creating a manufactured food product to sell to consumers? So you can use a church kitchen or a school kitchen, and these are licensed and inspected facilities. Although school kitchens are really, I don't see that a lot of clients are able to get access to school kitchens, mainly I think because they are feeding children and they're just not allowing it. A church kitchen would probably be a viable option. If it is a church that has a daycare, they're more likely to have a licensed inspected kitchen. You can also look at restaurants, although you have to manufacture your product when the restaurant is not open for business because obviously they're using the kitchen at that time. You can also look at private facilities. You can own or build your own facility to manufacture a food product. You can rent a facility that's already set up. And you can also seek to find a co-packer if you have an advanced recipe that you've already scaled up. You can find a company that already has a facility and just give them the recipe and they make it for you. And then they take a portion, anywhere from 10 to 40% of the profits from the product. You can also look for public facilities, and these can include shared use facilities such as food hubs or incubators or other types of facilities. And so what we have in Arkansas available are The facilities that are inspected and approved by the Arkansas Department of Health include newer to Arkansas. We have the Share Grounds facilities, which is a project that was initiated by the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. And we have facilities that are located in Marshall, McCrory, and Rison, and these are for small to medium scale production. Also, the University of Arkansas System has the Arkansas Food Innovation Center, or AFIC, located in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Other facilities include Our Kitchen in Little Rock and Delta Cuisine, a Southern Kitchen incubator in West Memphis. And these particular facilities, you would typically become a client of the facility, and you pay service fees to the facility to use the facility to manufacture your product. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Arkansas Food Innovation Center. It's been in operation for over 5 years, and it was created to assist local food industries in Arkansas. And so the Shareground facilities are smaller facilities that are modeled after the AFIC. The AFIC encourages agribusiness through establishment of new food manufacturing companies on the small to medium scale. It provides a certified and inspected facility for product development and processing of products for commercial markets. And it uses a fee-based service to assist the clients. And so the clients pay a fee per hour that they use to use the facility. And the Sharegrounds facility is modeled after AFIC. What are some of the AFIC activities that we've seen since we started in 2013? We've seen an increase in the number of companies assisted, the number of products produced, and the number of production runs. And we've also seen an increase in the retail value of products produced at AFIC, starting in $15,000 in 2013 to almost $800,000 in products created at AFIC in 2017. So if you are going to be creating a food product, what are some of the other considerations for equipment for food production? So let's say you're going to rent a facility, or you're going to build a facility. What are some of the equipment that you would need? And these are also equipment that are available in the shared use facilities, except in this case, you're paying a service fee. You don't have to buy equipment, but you have to rent the facility. So one of the first consideration if you are building or renting a facility is what type of utilities are available in the facility, because that dictates the type of equipment you need to purchase for your business. So in food production, there is a lot of cleaning that is involved. So what type of water is available for your product, for the cleaning and sanitation of the facility. And you have to be able to have hot and cold water. And how is that going to be achieved? Are you going to use natural gas? Is there going to be a boiler that uses steam? What kind of electricity is there going to be? A lot of the equipment that you buy on the small and medium size scale use more than something other than a 120 volt. So are you going to need 240 and 480 electricity? Is there something unique about it that will require compressed air? Do you have the ability to have compressed air to run a piece of equipment that may require that? You also have to look at the equipment capacity. Determine the capacity of the equipment needed. So how many bottles per minute do you plan to create? How many kilograms of a food are you going to process per hour? And so the scale, you could have small, medium, or large scale capacity. So small scale would be something more on the home kitchen level or restaurant kitchen level, and this equipment that it's pretty widely available at restaurant stores. The equipment that you use on the small scale has to be equipment that is made for food production. So you can't just go to a a store like a large box store and buy a food processor that's, if you look on the bottom of that food processor, it'll probably say for home use only. That's not the kind of equipment you need. You need equipment, the equipment that is made for commercial use, a lot of stainless steel. You have to be able to take it apart, clean all the pieces. So you're looking at a more expensive pieces of equipment, even on the small scale. But they are available. On the medium scale, it's a little harder to find these pieces of equipment, but it's often what is needed. And this is where those shared use facilities and hubs come in handy, because a lot of times this equipment is not readily available in the U.S. and it may be available in other countries. So we particularly in AFIC, we have equipment that's been modified for U.S. power. And if you're making product on a large scale, this may be this is maybe too large for you. Where we're talking about a tank size, a stainless steel tank of 100,000 gallons versus maybe one's on a medium scale, which would be 100 gallons, and a small scale would be maybe 10 gallons of something. So you got to think about the capacity that you want to produce. And then you need to make a decision about whether you want to buy new equipment or used equipment. And there's advantages and disadvantages for both. If you're buying new equipment, it's built to order what you're going to be doing. It can be more expensive, but you can have maybe it comes with a service plan or a warranty, so it has a longer service life. And you don't have to worry about prior history on what happened with that piece of equipment before you got it. And it should be pretty up to date on its safeguards and operator protection. So the safety of the machine is probably on a newer scale. Some of the equipment that you can buy used, particularly when you get to a lot of the kettles, the stainless steel kettles, these stainless steel pieces can really stand the test of time, and you may be able to find them at used sites, even like eBay, at a lower cost, like half the amount. But you're not going to know the service life of the equipment. So the prior history with the products may be dangerous or incompatible. An example of buying something used, maybe you've bought a tank that is, maybe it's stainless steel, but maybe it held some kind of chemical rather than a food product. So maybe it wasn't made for, wasn't used in a food production. Maybe it was used for some other type of product that would not be considered food safe. Safety protection could be outdated, missing, or disabled on the equipment. A good rule of thumb, if you're buying used equipment, is the less moving parts on the equipment, then probably the safer it is to buy used. So an example would be maybe a kettle, a stainless steel kettle, something like that. Whereas if you're buying something like a food processor that has lots of blades and moving parts, that maybe it would be best to buy it new. What type of equipment would we possibly be looking for? It depends on the product. So sometimes you may be looking at size reduction. So you were looking at maybe some type of Hobart food processor or chopper. You may want to have to blanch the product. So you're going to need some type of steam blancher, like where you put tomatoes in a tray and you steam the tomatoes to blanch them. Finishing is an example of a finisher would be like this center photo here, where you take the tomatoes that have been crushed in the Hobart and you steam them, and you run them through a finisher that takes out the seeds and skins. And an example also would be apple puree. If you ran a steamed apple puree through a finisher, it will remove the skins and seeds to give you like an applesauce. You're also going to be cooking the product. What size kettle do you need? Does the kettle need to have a stirring mechanism? Does it need to have a tilting mechanism where you can tilt it? Or will you be pumping the product out of the kettle? And you may also dry a product. So what type of food dehydrator would you need for that? So it's really going to depend on what the product, but there are options for all types of products. So other equipment types, you may be mixing, you may be baking, you may need a filler, you may need a package sealer. An example of a simple package sealer would be like where you have those food saver type things, but on a commercial scale, where you have the two bars that heat seal plastic, but also pull air out of the plastic so it vacuum seals it. And then at the end, you might want to have to label the product, and what kind of labeling machine do you need. If you're going to be using jars, you label the jars so that the jars roll, but maybe you've decided to use a square jar, and how do you get a label on that? So final thoughts on equipment. So choose equipment that fits your needs. Make sure the equipment works for you and your product, and do research. So research your options, and make sure you trust the decisions that you're making for the equipment. The equipment is going to be one of your largest capital investments, which is why you want to research it. And so design a process flow chart identifying all the steps in your process. And for each step, identify equipment that maximizes your throughput and minimizes your labor. So when you go into like a shared use facility like Sharegrounds or AFIC, that is one of the first things that the manager will help you with. He'll ask you to make your product in a small kitchen like you normally would at home, and then he'll look at the process and see how he and what pieces of equipment are going to help make the scale up of this operation more time manageable, because the labor costs can be quite expensive, so we want to minimize that labor per hour. Next, we're going to talk about food packaging. So in the end, when you're making a food product, you're eventually going to have it in some type of packaging so that the consumer can purchase it. So types of food packaging include jars, cans, pouches and vacuum packages, plastic cups and trays, bottles, clamshells, those are like the plastic things that berries come in, like blueberries, plastic bags, and also overwraps, like when you buy a frozen dinner, maybe like that, or if you've purchased a container of hummus and it's got a wrap on top of it as well. So those are some examples of packaging. But really, what is the function of the food packaging? So first of all, it can preserve the product that you've created. It can protect the product from physical damage during shipping or storage or sales. It can protect the product from environmental contamination, so nothing is getting in the product since it's sealed. It can also limit the oxygen around the product, which helps to increase the shelf life of the product, and it can also limit the moisture loss of the product, which also increases the shelf life of the product. So the considerations for packaging, that really depends on the product you have, where you're going to be selling it. Is it going to be refrigerated? Is it going to be shelf stable? How quickly will the consumer be purchasing it? So those are the decisions that are going to go into deciding how the product is going to be packaged. But you also have the cost of packaging that may come into play. So a jar, like a glass jar that a jelly would be made in, can cost between 50 cents to $1.60 for each jar, and that includes the lid. You can also have cans, which can be about $1 to $2 a can. You can have bags, and so you see when you get to bags, the cost per bag get much smaller, so about 8 cents to 10 cents a bag. Trays such as like little deli trays of some kind would be 5 cents to 30 cents. You can do something in like cups. I guess an example of a cup would be maybe something like the way the ready-to-eat kind of oatmeal or ramen noodles come at 80 cents a cup. And then you can have labeling, what is the labeling consideration, and how much cost is it going to be to have the package label versus have a label to put on the package. And labels can cost between 12 cents and 18 cents a piece, depending on if it's black and white or color. Also depending on if it's water resistant or has a glossy finish to it. And are the labels on maybe boxes that you're putting something in can range from $1 to $2 as well. Like example would be a cereal box. So final thoughts on packaging is that the packaging is important to your product shelf life and the location of where you put the product. So you see you don't see a lot of glass in a freezer section, for instance. You see a lot of more paper type and bag type products in the freezer section. The packaging can be expensive and a very expensive cost in the overall cost of the product. And the packaging is also used to communicate with the consumer and serves to promote the product, particularly the label. So the label of the package or the package itself will be what the consumer is looking at when they are purchasing the product. So to that aspect, we're going to talk about food labeling. And so there are federal requirements for all types of food labels, whether they're labels that are put onto the product after the product is made, or if it's a food label that is part of the product packaging. So the product label needs to contain a statement of identity. It needs to tell how much quantity is in the product. It will need to have a nutrition facts panel, which I'll explain in just a second. It will need to have an ingredient statement, will list the ingredients in order from highest to lowest, and the name and place of the business of the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. So if you look at any food product that is commercially sold, it's going to have, in the United States, it's going to have these elements. So let's look at the anatomy of a label. So I have a box here of Razorback brand cupcakes, right? So on the front display, which is the principal display panel, this is what is most likely seen by the consumer at the time of purchase. So it's going to include the statement of identity. We know it's cupcakes, and we know that it has about 9 ounces of cupcakes in the package. So it has a quantity on it. You can also have another panel on a product that is an information panel, which could be to the right, in this case, of the principal display panel. And it's going to have that name and address of the manufacturer, the ingredient statement, and possibly the nutrition facts panel on the side. So what is a nutrition facts panel, and how do you get one if you're making a product? So it basically tells you about the servings and calories of the product, the percent daily value, the nutrients, and usually there's some footnotes about the daily values. But if I am a food manufacturer and I need to get a nutrition facts panel, how is this created? So an example would be at the Arkansas Food Innovation Center, or AFIC, you can have a nutrition facts panel made for a fee. And what you do is you fill out a form that tells our manager what the ingredients are, how much ingredients you're using, so it's basically a little bit of your recipe, how much is in there, and the size of the container. And then using a database system, you create this JPEG or image of a nutrition facts panel, which you use on the panel. One thing I didn't mention on packaging and labels is that sometimes you see UPC codes and in commercial operations, and they're not mandatory, but they are used in most commercial facilities, and those can be purchased for online services for a fee. So final thoughts on labels. It would be best if you hire a graphic designer with experience with food labels that uses software that is specific for creating high-quality labels to design and create your labels. In the end, that's going to create a label that is more commercial ready. You can then find a printer with expertise with food labels, and then you basically send them the JPEG image or the image that the designer has given you, and you use the printer to create the labels. The labels are typically printed on rolls that are going to go on some type of labeling machine, and there'll be typical minimal number of labels that you can do, maybe 400 to 1,000 on a roll. And the more labels you make, of course the cost goes down per label. So when you print in larger quantities, it helps reduce the cost. But what you want to avoid is errors on your label once you get to this. So you want to make sure that if you're using a graphic designer, that it is someone who's familiar with food labels, or to have, before you go to printing the label, to have someone, particularly maybe at an AFIC manager, to look at the label and see that it's meeting all those federal requirements. Also at the Sharegrounds facilities, our managers are very good at looking at the labels and kind of previewing them to make sure you're not going to make a mistake with the label and incur a cost that you did not expect for having to reprint. So what do we see for food production successes? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the examples of AFIC products that we've seen in the last 7 years that we've been in operation. So we've seen tomato sauces, all kinds of sauces, dehydrated mushrooms, some ciders and juices, apple products, apple sauce, apple butter, apple jelly. We have simple syrups. We've had fermented cabbages. We've had jalapeno slices that have been fermented. We have a kombucha client, pesto, hummus, salad dressing, baked goods, and those are some of the examples of products we've seen. So I'm going to talk about some of the clients that have had success in starting with great ferments. So, starting with an idea or a concept, they developed a fermented vegetable product containing probiotics and prebiotics, and they sell their products at commercial markets like Whole Foods and natural food stores in Arkansas, but also sell to restaurants. Pink House Alchemy produces flavored simple syrups, and these are sold locally at regional markets. You actually find them in coffee houses, also coffee shops and bars where they use them to flavor the beverages. Mount Olive Pepper Company creates smoked peppers to create a ground hickory smoked pepper powder that retails in stores and online. My Father's Garden, they actually produce a jalapeno lime pepper jelly that's sold at our local grocery stores in Northwest Arkansas and other locations in Arkansas. And then JJ's Barbecue Sauce, which I think has a new name now. He developed a barbecue sauce and a mustard sauce that is made from natural ingredients, and it's sold in retail, and he's working on national sales. So these commercial kitchens in Arkansas have positive impacts to our economies. They help local farmers generate revenue and contribute to farm sustainability. It also assists entrepreneurs with starting these new local food companies, which contribute to the overall increase in our economic development and encourages our local food system. And we're also creating educational opportunities for the community. We do a lot of workshops around the Sharegrounds projects and the Arkansas Food Innovation Center on teaching farmers and entrepreneurs how to take the next step into food production, and really helps support that local food community that we want to achieve in Arkansas. So thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.